In 1984, a 24-year-old singer stood on the Oscar stage holding the trophy for Best Original Song. Her song, Flashdance, What a Feeling, had already sold more than 20 million copies, reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and became one of the defining songs of the 1980s. Just 4 years earlier, she had also been the voice behind another anthem of a generation, Fame. 2 films, 2 iconic songs, 1 Oscar. But only a few years after that peak, the music industry almost erased her from the radio. What really happened to Irene Cara? For a brief moment in the early 1980s, Irene Cara seemed unstoppable. In 1980, the film fame exploded into popular culture. Cara didn't just play one of the students chasing success at New York's High School of Performing Arts. She became the voice of the dream itself. Her performance of Fame turned the song into a global anthem about ambition, youth, and the price of chasing the spotlight. But what happened next was even more extraordinary. In 1983, Cara recorded a song for a small dance film few people expected to become a phenomenon, Flashdance. The track, Flashdance, What a Feeling, shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 6 weeks. Within a single year, the song achieved something rare. 20 million records sold worldwide, Grammy Award, Golden Globe, and the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1984. At just 24 years old, Irene Cara had already done what most artists spend entire careers trying to achieve. 2 films, 2 songs that defined a generation. But while the world saw a rising superstar, a very different story was unfolding behind the scenes. Because at the exact moment Irene Cara reached the top of Hollywood, a contract she had signed years earlier was quietly setting the stage for her fall. Irene Cara Escalera was born on March 18, 1959, in the Bronx, New York, a borough known for its energy, diversity, and constant struggle. Long before it became associated with hip-hop and cultural reinvention, the Bronx of the 1960s was a place where many immigrant families fought every day to build stability. Cara's household reflected that reality. Her father, Gaspar Escalera, was a factory worker of Puerto Rican descent, while her mother, Louise Escalera, came from a Cuban background and had once dreamed of becoming a professional singer. Music was always present in their apartment. Radios played Latin music, jazz, soul, and Broadway soundtracks, filling the small home with melodies that would quietly shape the imagination of their youngest daughter. From an early age, Irene seemed unusually drawn to sound. Family members later recalled that before she could even read properly, she could repeat complex melodies after hearing them only once. Her mother quickly noticed that the child possessed something rare, not just enthusiasm, but instinct. Louise began encouraging Irene to sing along with records, sometimes stopping the radio to explain rhythm and phrasing. By the age of 5, Irene was already studying piano, dance, and vocal performance. It was not simply an after-school hobby. For her family, it was an investment in a possibility that might one day change their lives. New York in the late 1960s offered opportunities for talented children, especially in television. Cara soon began appearing on Spanish-language television programs, performing songs and participating in children's entertainment segments. These early appearances did more than give her stage experience. They also taught her discipline. Television required precision. Lines had to be remembered, cues had to be followed, and performances had to happen on schedule. For a young performer, the environment could be intimidating, but Irene adapted quickly. Producers noticed that she rarely froze in front of cameras. Instead, she seemed energized by the attention. By the time she reached elementary school, Irene had already developed a reputation in local performing circles as a child who could sing, act, and dance with equal confidence. In the entertainment industry, this combination is often described as a triple threat. Broadway, television producers, and casting agents were constantly searching for performers who could master all 3 disciplines. Cara's natural versatility made her stand out among hundreds of young hopefuls in New York. Still, success was far from guaranteed. The American entertainment industry of the early 1970s was not particularly welcoming to young Latina performers. Casting directors frequently struggled to categorize Cara. She did not fit neatly into the narrow roles that Hollywood had historically written for Hispanic actresses. Many auditions ended the same way: polite compliments about her talent, followed by a quiet rejection because producers weren't sure where she fit. For a child who had already invested years into training, those moments could have been discouraging, yet they also taught Irene an early lesson about the business she was entering. Talent might open the door, but acceptance often depended on factors far beyond ability. Her parents continued pushing forward. They enrolled Irene in professional children's school in Manhattan, an institution designed specifically for young performers balancing education with professional work. Many future stars would pass through its classrooms, but at the time it was simply a place where ambitious children tried to survive demanding schedules. Days often began with regular academic lessons and ended with rehearsals, auditions, or stage performances scattered across New York City. The city itself became part of Cara's education. Manhattan theaters, dance studios, and rehearsal halls exposed her to the world she wanted to join. She watched Broadway actors rehearse for hours, perfecting movements that audiences might barely notice. She observed musicians arguing over arrangements and producers debating creative decisions. Gradually, she began to understand that the entertainment industry was not simply a stage where talent shined. It was also a complicated machine built on contracts, negotiations, and power dynamics. During her early teenage years, Irene continued appearing in television productions and stage performances. These jobs rarely made headlines, but each one added experience. She learned how to record vocals in studios, how to deliver lines for camera angles, and how to perform under pressure when directors demanded multiple takes. By the mid-1970s, she had already accumulated more professional credits than many adult performers. What Irene could not yet see was how closely her real life mirrored the characters she would soon portray. She was a young artist growing up in New York, surrounded by other ambitious performers chasing recognition in a competitive industry. That environment would soon inspire one of the most famous films about artistic ambition ever made. And when that film finally appeared at the end of the decade, Irene Cara would not just be part of the story. She would become the voice that defined it. By the late 1970s, Irene Cara was no longer just a talented child performer moving between small television appearances and stage rehearsals. She had entered a new phase, the difficult transition from child performer to professional artist. Many young entertainers disappear during this stage. The industry that once celebrated them as prodigies suddenly becomes uncertain about how to position them as adults. Cara understood this risk, even if she was still barely out of her teens. New York remained the center of her world. Unlike many performers who chase opportunities in Los Angeles, Cara stayed close to the city that had shaped her. She continued performing in theater productions and television programs, slowly building a resume that proved she was more than a child star. One of the most important early platforms for her development was the educational television series The Electric Company. The program was designed to teach reading skills to children, but behind the scenes it also functioned as a training ground for young performers. Cara appeared in musical segments and comedic sketches, gaining experience with live performance timing, studio recording, and camera work. The show may not have been glamorous, but it offered something far more valuable: stability and visibility. Casting directors began to notice her ability to move naturally between acting and singing. Unlike performers who specialize in one discipline, Cara seemed comfortable inhabiting multiple roles. She could deliver dialogue with emotional clarity, then step into a recording booth and produce a powerful vocal performance minutes later. During this time, the American film industry was also shifting. Hollywood studios were looking for stories about youth creativity and the challenges of artistic ambition. The late 1970s had seen a wave of films exploring the lives of young people trying to find themselves in rapidly changing cultural landscapes. Producers began developing a project set in New York that would capture this energy, a film about students attending the High School of Performing Arts, one of the most prestigious art schools in the country. The project would eventually become Fame. The concept was simple but powerful. Instead of portraying glamorous celebrities, the film would follow aspiring performers struggling through training, rejection, and personal doubt. Music, dance, and acting would all play central roles in the narrative. The filmmakers needed actors who could do more than perform a single skill. They needed real performers capable of singing, dancing, and acting convincingly on screen. For Irene Cara, the audition represented a rare alignment between her life and a character. The role she was reading for, Coco Hernandez, was a young Latina performer with enormous ambition, trying to carve out a place in a competitive artistic world. It was a character who understood both the excitement and the insecurity of chasing success in New York. The casting process was intense. Hundreds of young performers auditioned for the film. Many had strong dance backgrounds. Others had powerful singing voices. But few could combine both with believable acting. Cara's years of training suddenly became an advantage. She knew how to deliver emotional dialogue, but she could also move confidently through musical sequences. When the casting decisions were finalized, Irene Cara secured the role of Coco Hernandez. It was the biggest opportunity of her career so far. Yet the project carried risks. The film did not feature established Hollywood stars. Its success would depend entirely on the chemistry and authenticity of its young cast. During production, Cara quickly became one of the most recognizable faces on set. Her performance captured the mixture of determination and vulnerability that defined the character. But what truly elevated her role came from a decision that extended beyond acting. The filmmakers wanted a powerful musical theme that would represent the film's central message: the hunger for recognition, the desire to be seen, the dream of artistic success. When discussions began about who would perform the film's title song, Cara emerged as the obvious choice. Her voice carried both strength and youthful urgency, qualities that matched the emotional core of the story. Recording sessions for the song took place during the film's production. The track, simply titled Fame, was designed to reflect the obsession many young artists feel toward recognition. Its lyrics spoke directly to ambition, sacrifice, and the price of chasing a dream. At the time, few people involved with the project could fully predict what would happen once the film and its music reached the public. The production felt important, but it was still one among many films being developed during that era. For Irene Cara, it was primarily a chance to prove she could carry a major role in a feature film. What she did not yet realize was that this project would transform her life almost overnight, because when Fame finally reached theaters in 1980, it would do more than tell a story about artistic ambition. It would create a cultural moment, and Irene Cara's voice would become the sound that defined it. When Fame premiered in 1980, no one involved in production could fully anticipate what was about to happen. The film was not designed as a traditional Hollywood blockbuster. It had no major movie stars, and its story focused on the daily struggles of young performers rather than glamorous celebrity life. Yet the raw energy of the film connected immediately with audiences. Young viewers especially recognized something authentic in its message: the hunger to be seen, to be heard, and to prove that talent could open a door into a different life. At the center of that message was Irene Cara. Her portrayal of Coco Hernandez captured both confidence and vulnerability. Coco was ambitious, outspoken, and determined to succeed, yet she also represented the uncertainty that every aspiring artist feels. Cara's performance brought emotional credibility to the role, but it was her voice that pushed the film beyond ordinary success. The song Fame quickly became the emotional core of the movie. When the track was released as a single, it began climbing the charts almost immediately. In the United States, it reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, while internationally it performed even more strongly, reaching number 1 in several countries. Radio stations began playing it constantly. The song's lyrics, celebrating ambition while hinting at its cost, resonated with listeners far beyond the film's audience. Suddenly, Irene Cara was no longer just an actress in a successful movie. She had become the voice of a generation that believed success could be earned through talent and determination. For many young artists around the world, Fame became more than a song. It became a declaration of intent. The success of the film created new opportunities for Cara almost overnight. Interviews, television appearances, and concert performances followed. Producers recognized that she represented something rare, a performer who could bridge the worlds of film and music without losing credibility in either. Yet the momentum from Fame would soon be eclipsed by something even bigger. In 1983, producers working on a new film approached Cara with an unusual opportunity. The project was called Flashdance, a story about a young woman working as a welder by day while secretly dreaming of becoming a professional dancer. Like Fame, the film centered on ambition and artistic aspiration. But the producers needed a song that could capture the emotional release of finally believing in one's own talent. Cara was invited to record a track that would eventually become Flashdance. What a feeling. The recording process itself was intense. Cara didn't simply perform the song, she helped shape it, working with songwriters Giorgio Moroder and Keith Forsey. She contributed to the lyrics and emotional tone of the track. The result was a song that balanced vulnerability with explosive optimism. It began softly, almost uncertainly, before building into a powerful declaration of confidence. When Flashdance premiered in 1983, the film quickly found its audience, but it was a song that truly exploded. Flashdance, What a Feeling, surged up the charts, eventually reaching #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it remained for 6 consecutive weeks. Around the world, the single sold more than 20 million copies, becoming one of the biggest songs of the decade. Awards followed rapidly. The track won a Grammy Award, a Golden Globe, and most importantly, the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1984. On Oscar night, Irene Cara stood on stage at just 24 years old, holding the most prestigious award in film music. Within a span of only 4 years, she had become the voice behind 2 of the most recognizable songs in modern cinema, Fame and Flashdance. What a feeling. For the public, it looked like the beginning of an unstoppable career. Cara had the voice, the charisma, and the industry recognition that many artists spend decades chasing. She had already reached milestones that seemed to guarantee a lifetime of opportunity. But behind the scenes, the reality of her situation was beginning to look very different. Because while the world celebrated Irene Cara as a rising superstar, the business arrangements surrounding her career were becoming increasingly complicated. And those complications would soon threaten everything she had worked for. From the outside, Irene Cara's career in the mid-1980s looked almost unreal. Within just a few years, she had delivered 2 songs that defined a generation. Fame had become an anthem for ambition, and Flashdance, What a Feeling, had turned her into an Academy Award winner at the age of 24. In Hollywood terms, she had done everything right. She had talent, credibility, and the kind of global recognition that record labels dream of building around. But the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated. Long before the Oscar, long before the global success of Flashdance, Cara had signed a management and recording agreement while she was still a young artist trying to establish herself in industry. At the time, contracts like these were common. Young performers often trusted managers and production companies to guide their careers, handle negotiations, and manage financial arrangements. Few fully understood the legal structures they were entering. Cara would later argue that this early contract placed an extraordinary amount of control in the hands of her management company, Network Records, led by Al Corey and Jerry Sharrow. According to Cara, the agreement allowed the company to oversee nearly every aspect of her professional activities, including recording deals, performance opportunities, and financial distribution. For a while, the arrangement did not appear to cause problems. During the early success of Fame, Cara was focused on building her career, rather than questioning the financial details behind it. But as the years passed and her popularity grew, she began to notice something unsettling. The money did not match the success. Fame had become a global hit. Flashdance, What a Feeling, was selling millions of records around the world. Yet, Cara claimed that the payments reaching her did not reflect the scale of those achievements. Royalties were delayed, accounting reports were unclear, and explanations from management seemed vague. At first, she tried to resolve the situation privately. Conversations with her management company grew increasingly tense. Cara wanted transparency. She wanted to understand how revenue from her work was being distributed, but the responses she received did not satisfy her. By 1985, the situation had escalated beyond internal disagreement. Irene Cara made a decision that many artists fear making. She filed a lawsuit against her own management company, accusing them of breach of contract, financial mismanagement, and unpaid royalties. The legal battle that followed would become one of the most difficult periods of her life. In theory, artists who challenge unfair contracts are defending their rights. In practice, the entertainment industry often reacts very differently. Lawsuits can disrupt business relationships. Record labels, producers, and promoters may hesitate to work with artists involved in ongoing legal disputes, especially when those disputes involve companies with powerful connections. As Cara's case moved through the courts, something unusual began happening to her career. Opportunities began to disappear. Radio stations that had once played her music constantly started focusing on newer artists. Record labels became reluctant to invest in new projects involving her. Meetings that once led to collaborations quietly stopped happening. Within the industry, the situation created an unspoken tension. Cara later claimed that she had effectively been blacklisted. Whether formally organized or simply the result of industry caution, the outcome looked the same. The momentum that had carried her to an Oscar stage began to slow dramatically. The public still recognized her voice, but new releases no longer received the same promotional push. For Cara, the experience was deeply frustrating. She had not lost her talent. She had not lost her audience. Yet the machinery of the industry that once supported her success seemed to have turned away. At the same time, the lawsuit itself dragged on for years. Legal disputes involving entertainment contracts are notoriously complex. Lawyers examined royalty structures, management agreements, and financial records stretching back across multiple projects. The process consumed time, energy, and emotional stability. While the legal battle unfolded, the music industry itself was changing rapidly. The mid-1980s saw the rise of MTV, a platform that reshaped the way pop music reached audiences. Image and video production suddenly became as important as vocal performance. Younger artists with strong visual branding began dominating airwaves and television screens. Pop music was entering a new era defined by elaborate music videos and aggressive marketing campaigns. For an artist caught in legal conflict with management and labels, adapting to this new landscape became extremely difficult. By the late 1980s, Irene Cara's presence on mainstream charts had faded significantly. To casual observers, it might have appeared that her career simply cooled after an intense early peak. Few outside the industry understood the legal and contractual battle unfolding behind the scenes. For Cara, however, the emotional toll was enormous. Imagine reaching the highest levels of recognition in your profession, winning an Academy Award, performing songs known around the world, only to find yourself spending years in courtrooms fighting over contracts and royalties. The contrast between public success and private struggle became one of the defining contradictions of her career. Finally, after years of legal conflict, the case reached its conclusion. In the late 1980s, the court ruled in Cara's favor. The decision determined that her management company had indeed failed to properly account for and distribute royalties related to her recordings and projects. Cara was awarded millions of dollars in damages. Legally, it was a victory. Financially, it helped compensate for years of lost income. But victories in court do not always restore what has already been lost. By the time the case ended, the momentum that once defined Irene Cara's career had largely vanished from the mainstream spotlight. The music industry had moved on to new trends, new faces, and new sounds. Rebuilding the kind of global presence she had enjoyed earlier in the decade would prove extremely difficult. Yet the story did not end there, because the experience forced Cara to confront an important question. If the traditional industry structure could no longer guarantee her future, what kind of career could she build on her own terms? The answer would lead her toward a very different path, one that focused less on fame and more on artistic independence. By the time Irene Cara finally won her legal battle in the late 1980s, the victory felt strangely quiet. The court had ruled in her favor, confirming that her management company had failed to properly account for royalties connected to her recordings and projects. Financially, the decision mattered. Cara was awarded millions of dollars in damages, compensation for years of earnings that should have reached her long before. But the music industry does not operate like a courtroom. Legal justice does not automatically restore cultural momentum. By the time the lawsuit ended, the pop landscape had shifted dramatically. The late 1980s belonged to a new generation of artists dominating radio and the rapidly expanding world of music television. MTV, which had launched in 1981, had transformed the entire business. Image, Visual storytelling and aggressive promotion now played a central role in determining which artists remained visible. For Cara, returning to the exact position she once held was no longer realistic. The experience forced her to rethink her relationship with the industry that had first elevated her and then complicated her career. Instead of chasing the same system that had once failed her, she began exploring a different path, one that placed more control in her own hands. Cara continued recording music, releasing projects that allowed her to experiment creatively without the heavy oversight that had previously shaped her career. Some of these works did not reach the massive commercial audience she had enjoyed earlier, but they represented something new: artistic independence. For the first time since her early breakthrough, she was able to approach music without the same contractual pressures that had once dictated the direction of her work. Live performance also became an important part of her professional life. Concert tours allowed her to reconnect directly with audiences who still remembered the impact of her voice. Wherever she performed, two songs inevitably carried the strongest reaction. When the opening notes of Fame appeared, crowds responded instantly, and when the familiar melody of Flashdance, What a Feeling followed, audiences were reminded of the era when those songs dominated global charts. These performances revealed something important about Cara's legacy. Even though the industry had shifted away from her at its commercial center, the cultural memory of her music had never disappeared. The songs continued to live independently of the business conflicts that had complicated her career. During the 1990s and early 2000s, Cara expanded her creative work beyond traditional recording projects. She collaborated with musicians in different genres, participated in theater productions, and continued writing music. While she no longer occupied the intense spotlight of early 1980s pop culture, she remained active as an artist. This stage of her life represented a quieter form of rebirth. Instead of being defined by chart positions or industry rankings, Cara's work focused on maintaining a connection with the craft that had shaped her life since childhood. The drive that once pushed her toward global recognition gradually transformed into something more personal: the desire to continue creating. Looking back, the turning point created by the lawsuit did more than interrupt her commercial momentum. It forced Irene Cara to reconsider the meaning of success itself. Fame had brought recognition, awards, and extraordinary visibility, but it had also exposed the fragile structures behind the entertainment industry. The years that followed allowed her to build a career less dependent on those structures. And in doing so, she preserved the one thing that had started everything in the first place: her voice. As the years moved forward, Irene Cara gradually stepped away from the intense pressure that had once defined her early career. The spotlight that had surrounded her in the early 1980s faded, but something interesting happened in the decades that followed. While the industry itself moved on, the songs that made her famous refused to disappear. Fame and Flashdance, What a Feeling continued to live in a space far beyond the music charts. Both songs became permanent fixtures of popular culture. They appeared repeatedly in films, television shows, commercials, and live performances around the world. The themes they carried, ambition, resilience, and emotional intensity of chasing a dream, remained universal. Long after their original release, new generations continued discovering the music. In 2009, when the film Fame was remade for a new audience, the original song still held its symbolic power. It remained the emotional center of the story, a reminder of the era when the first film had captured the imagination of millions of young performers. Cara herself maintained a quieter but steady presence in the performing world. She toured internationally, appearing at concerts, festivals, and nostalgic music events that celebrated the defining hits of the 1980s. On stage, the reaction from audiences often confirmed something that the music industry had underestimated years earlier. People had never forgotten her voice. Fans who grew up with her songs saw them as part of the soundtrack of their lives. For many, Flashdance, What a Feeling, represented a moment in time when pop music captured pure optimism. Fame, meanwhile, carried a deeper emotional message about ambition and identity, an anthem for anyone trying to prove their place in the world. Beyond performance, Cara continued writing music and collaborating with other artists. Her creative work no longer depended on dominating radio charts. Instead, It existed in a more independent artistic space where she could experiment without the expectations that had once surrounded her career. When observers look back at Irene Cara's place in music history, the numbers alone tell part of the story. She was the voice behind songs that sold tens of millions of records, topped international charts, and won some of the most prestigious awards in entertainment, including the Academy Award for Best Original Song. But her legacy also reveals something more subtle. Few artists can say they defined the emotional sound of an entire cultural moment. Irene Cara did it twice. Once with Fame in 1980, and again with Flashdance. What a Feeling in 1983. Even when the industry moved forward, those songs continued carrying her voice across decades, long after the spotlight had shifted elsewhere. On November 25, 2022, Irene Cara was found dead in her home in Florida. She was 63 years old. The news spread quickly across social media and the music world, surprising many people who had grown up hearing her voice without always knowing the complicated story behind it. Tributes began appearing almost immediately. Musicians, actors, and fans shared memories of the songs that had shaped an entire generation. For many, Cara's music represented a very specific moment in time. The early 1980s, when pop music, film, and youth culture collided to create something unforgettable. Looking back, Irene Cara's career tells a story that the entertainment industry repeats more often than it admits. A young artist rises quickly. The world celebrates the success. Awards arrive, records sell, and the spotlight becomes blindingly bright. But behind that success, business agreements and industry power structures quietly determine how long that spotlight will last. Cara once sang about fame as if it were a promise. The song described the thrill of being recognized, of finally stepping into the light after years of struggle. For millions of listeners, it sounded like a celebration, yet her own life revealed a more complicated truth. Fame can elevate an artist overnight, but it can also vanish just as quickly, leaving the music itself to carry the story forward. And in Irene Cara's case, that music never truly disappeared, because even decades later, whenever the first notes of Flashdance, What a Feeling, or Fame begin to play, the same feeling returns, a reminder of the moment when one voice captured the